Okay, thank you everyone for checking on video, I suppose. Probably gonna watch it after the fact. So this is, I think, the second or third um, panel that we've done as the South African University Mediation Enthusiast Group. Yes, I know it's a mouthful. I named it for a reason because I believe that there are lots of you at university that may not be so enchanted by the LLB, but may have enrolled and it's too late to turn back. But you know that you have this problem solving ability, that you may not be necessarily cut out for the quadrant, and that you can do this in your sleep. And so the S.A.U.M.E is has big dreams, has big goals, and one of it is to create, the main thing is to create a safe space for you guys at university level mainly, where you have somewhere to go, as budding mediators, budding problem solvers. You might be doing it already, and just not getting recognition or validation. I know litigation gets all of the acclaim. And universities have litigation societies, they have moot court societies, but you are just not part of that crowd. You can do it if you had to, like me, but you're not, if you didn't have to, if you could find a mediation or even an alternative dispute resolution safe space, you would run there in a heartbeat. So that's the goal of the S.A.U.M.E. And of course, we have these online panels to create resources for you to learn from some of our top people, right? So here today, we're going to be talking about something that you might have come across already, or maybe you're going to encounter it for the first time, and that's called reflective practice and communities of practice, which are not, strictly speaking, limited to mediation or peculiar to mediation, but it's become popular amongst mediators, mainly because the mediation practice is a very lonely practice. It's usually one mediator. I don't know how common co-mediators are, but it's usually one mediator and with a whole bunch of confidentiality, and you know, you can sort of get locked in and become, a bit of a silo. So reflective practice and communities of practice, it's the same thing basically, and it just allows mediators to come together and learn from each other, hide out those things that can't be taught from a textbook or from a 40-hour course. And just it's a safe space for learning, basically. So today I have two very esteemed colleagues. We're going to talk to you about the subject from different perspectives. So we have Tracey-Leigh Wessels, who is an attorney, mediator. She's going to talk to you about how effective practice, how that's benefited her mediation practice, and why she's such a strong advocate for it. And then, of course, in the lower corner, we have Mark Turpin, who is going to discuss it from a facilitator's perspective, where he started communities of practice across various groups of professionals, coaches, doctors, other types of professionals, and of course, mediators. And he can talk to you from that perspective, the mechanics of how the group works, and of course, the benefits he's seen in terms of what it's done for the mediators. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tracey, and she's going to give us her little feedback.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Mark. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to speak to you about something that I'm really passionate about. So first and foremost, I'm passionate about mediation, always have been, was a candidate attorney when I was given the opportunity to mediate. So we're talking a long time ago. And I just saw the value of parties being able to sit and come to the decision that they knew they would work for them. And so I've always been in the family law environment, and certainly from a family perspective, have seen the value of mediation. So it might sound like because I have years of experience that I have expertise, but really what I want to say to you is that Experience does not equate to mastery. The critical thing with mediation, as Lisa alluded to, is that we work in isolation. It's confidential, it's without prejudice, it's ourselves and the clients. And so what happens within the room really stays within the room. And often that equates to clients not even giving us feedback. Now, Michael Jordan, the great basketball player, has said you can shoot hoops for 8 hours a day. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be skilled at doing it. You'll just be skilled at shooting. Your technique might be bad, unless you have somebody that is assisting you and training you and guiding you. And just on the same vein, Malcolm Gladwell has said you need 10,000 hours of practice to become a master. Well, I don't think we have 10,000 hours available to us, but he goes on and he qualifies that statement by saying, but what you do need to have is a process of reflecting on that practice in order to make it part of who you are and to be able to assess if you're doing it correctly. So the critical thing, whether you're a young attorney, a mediator, a coach, wherever you are specifically placed, the critical thing is to just be alert to the value of the coach, the mentor, the guide, whatever that you want to call it. And we don't get that in mediation. But reflective practice gives us that opportunity. And that's really what I'm wanting to just share a little bit with you about. The reason reflective practice gives you this opportunity that you wouldn't get in the room is essentially because it allows you to think back in a group format on maybe what was a surprising encounter. Maybe you had a difficult experience with clients. Maybe there was something that was unique that you hadn't experienced in the past. Now, in a normal scenario, a mediator who's not part of a group with other mediators, who's not part of a reflective practice or mentoring group, would really be stuck holding that dilemma and not really knowing what to do with it. Within the reflective practice group, what we do is, as a group of mediators, we come around that problem and we essentially say we're going to replicate the mediation scenario in the sense of the person, the mediator with the dilemma, is going to present that dilemma. We are not going to tell that mediator what we think they ought to have done. And the reason for that is very honoring process is because we recognize that we weren't in that room. So there are only 3 people, maybe 4, at max 5 in that room, and none of us, except for that mediator, happened to be in the room. And so we don't quite know what was happening in the dynamics and what was the thinking around some of the questions perhaps that the mediator posed to the parties. And so we really put the mediator in the hot seat. We allow them to say, what was their practice dilemma? And we allow them through a process of our questioning and our having, like, what I would say is an intentional curiosity, which is also what a mediator has to have in the mediation room. We allow them to unpack what were the areas that caused the strife or the concern, the uncomfortability for them, with a view through this process of maybe we could even call it self-discovery, for them to be able to say, you know what, I actually figured out, I realized this is some of the things that was potentially happening. I had this bias, this assumption. And so this whole process really of reflective practice group allows the mediator, through a process of self self-discovery, self-exploration, to come to a place where they're able to say, I have an understanding of what happened, and I know how I'm going to deal with it, a situation like that going forward. And so this entire process for us, as maybe the debriefers sitting in with our colleague who's sharing their dilemma, is also one where we are allowed to learn vicariously. So we're not sitting there quiet while somebody is unpacking. We are asking questions. We are curious. We want to help, but we don't give the solution. And I think that that is one of the things that distinguishes reflective practice from maybe some of the other mentoring groups, because we will not tell them this is what you ought to have done. Just like with mediation, you never tell the clients this is what you have to do. If we are, as mediators, practicing facilitative mediation, we will guide clients, we will ask them questions, but we won't essentially tell them, I've evaluated, I've looked at this situation, and this is what you ought to do, and this is what you should have been thinking, and doing judgments of right or wrong. And so, again, we're tracking in the reflective practice group with what we do in mediation, and we're allowing that mediator in the hot seats to actually come to that process of saying, I've got it. I know really how I'm going to handle this process going forward. And so for me, that really is a value that I believe a lot more of our mediators, our coaches could in fact maybe tap into and become part of these groups, that it would actually help them to really just grow in competence, in confidence. So I really see reflective practices as purposeful mastery, where you're saying, look, this is the scenario as it stands. I understand I work alone, but I'm going to once a month, once every 6 weeks, I'm going to be part of a bigger group, irrespective of how really it's going to be formulated or that. I just say, look, I'm a proponent of reflective practice, but I'm going to be part of this bigger group, and I am going to purposefully and with intention seek to learn more of a skill. It is also so let me backtrack and say being part of a reflective practice group is also an opportunity for mediators to see how other mediators are thinking. And we don't get that value. You know, if you're in court, you can watch your colleagues, you can sit, you can gain just some practical experience through the observation, but we don't have that in mediation, except when you're a part of the bigger group. So from my perspective, Lisa, I just see reflective practice as really providing a tool. So it's one of the tools we could access, but it provides a tool that young mediators can use to build up and actually fast track their experience. So we're talking where I was saying, look, experience doesn't mean mastery, but experience with what I see as a reflective practice kind of tool, where you have this focusing back on ability and strategizing into the future, really is going to create a mastery that we might not have had access to if we weren't part of a larger community of similar professionals. And really, that for me, in a nutshell, is reflective practice. If I could just give a shout out to, from mediators' perspective, one of the proponents is Michael Lang from the USA. And Michael is now in his 80s and has written 2 books on reflective practice, has written a book on artistry in practice. I'm not sure what that book is, just the title now just escapes me, but he's really been into mediators coming and striving towards excellence. And so having been a part of his group for, oh goodness, it's now close on 7 years, has really assisted me in moving to a place of where I'm able to say, I feel a lot more confidence. It doesn't mean I don't start a mediation and I don't have the normal nerves, because you don't know what conflict is coming in. But it's just that sense of I understand how my colleagues work, and I also have a sense of what I can do if I reach a roadblock. So I don't know if that's enough of a long introduction, but thank you for the time.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, I think two important things that stood out for me were the fact that you're not coming to the group with answers, and you're not coming to prognosticate. Like you said, you were not in the same room as the mediator who had the practice issue. So you don't have that prerogative to pronounce after the fact. So I think that requires a lot of humility to pick. So that's another, we're talking about soft skills. I think humility is one of those. I think I think underpinning qualities that you need to have, because if you're gonna practice, look, if you're gonna practice in it, as I said, mediators practice in it, can practice in the silo. You can become proud in your own results and your own solutions, and look at my case turnover, and so many successful mediations, no comeback, etc. But at the same time, being part, if you put yourself in as part of a reflective practice group, that requires a lot of humility, because suddenly, like you said, it's not about how many you've done or how many you resolved or whatever, your success rate. You're coming there basically wide open. You don't have the answers for everybody. And I think it's very important, because with the litigation space, you're always expected to have answers for everyone, right? So that demand, that humility of telling a client, I don't know what to do, is not present in the legal profession. Lawyers feel pressure to tell clients what to do, because unlike mediation, which is a facilitated resolution, you have to tell a client what's coming next, how you're going to do it, what are the steps, etc. So there's no space to say, hey, I don't know. If you don't know, you pretend that you know, leave the consultation phone a colleague and say, hey, tell me what to do. Okay. So that obviously that is much better suited to sitting in a circle and having their own reflective practice. But when it comes to mediation, it seems like you need humility to be able to come there, no matter if you're 30 years, 10 years, 5 years as a mediator, or even like Michael Laird, I don't know, 50 years or more. You come there and you're like, I don't know what to do in those situations, and I can't tell you what. So I think it requires a lot, that underpinning of humility. And I think that's probably what sets mediators apart, is that I think the whole thing of not imposing a solution takes the pressure off a little bit, to having an answer, because you're not supposed to tell the client anyway. So you're not supposed to tell your colleague in the reflective practice group anyway. So it takes that pressure off of having to have all the answers, I think, which is why I think it's a bit more chilled, to use modern or popular language. No, by no means easy, but a lot more chilled in that, you can just step back and not worry about having all the answers, and know that you have a group of people that are going to basically mediate your dilemma, which is helping you to figure out after the fact what we should have done. So I think that's a very, it's revolutionary. If you're coming from the legal practice, but if you're studying an LLB, it's very revolutionary. in terms of the mindset. So thank you, Tracy. That was, I won't say enough or sufficient because I think you have a bit of a gold mine in this regard, but hopefully there'll be more panels like this. But and when you're not done by any means, so if you want to jump in at any point in the after Mark is finished, then you're welcome to. Thank you, Tracy. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Tracy. And I want to really build on what you've been saying, Tracy, because the work that I've done over the years with what I call communities of practice is very, very similar to the kind of processes that you've been talking about. Based on a fundamental idea, I think that learning is at its best when it is a social process, when we learn together, rather than when it is a taught process when we're in a classroom. That adults learn best when they learn together in community. And as professionals, we learn best when we are engaging with fellow professionals on our dilemmas, on our questions, and so on. So that's my starting point, that learning, reflective learning and reflective practice is best done in community, as seeing learning as a social process. And when we go through our BAs and do our degrees and our courses and so on, we are very often taught technical skills on how to do something. We're given guidelines and spreadsheets and so on in terms of process flows and so that kind of thing. And so it is with mediation as well. And what we are not taught, and which is much harder to teach, are the social skills, the softer skills that we also need if we are doing this kind of work. And those come as we develop wisdom and as we work together and learn together in community with other fellow professionals. We learn how to manage the dilemmas that come, the interpersonal issues that arise, and we need those softer skills to manage those effectively. And also, I would add, we also learn the values that are important. Because again, as we are taught to become lawyers, we are not usually taught a set of values, just as we are not usually taught the softer skills. And I think to be a master or to develop mastery in a particular profession, we need to have a combination of the technical knowledge and expertise that we are taught, the experience that we develop and the softer skills that are needed, but also a value system that goes with that. And I think the softer skills and the value systems are things that we learn together in community through these reflective dialogues that we can have. And I very much like the idea of starting always with a dilemma or with a question when we meet, which means people have to be vulnerable in some ways to be able to bring their question. And then are supported by their colleagues in unpacking that question, going to the core of the issue, finding out what's really happening, because sometimes the presenting dilemma or question is not really the issue. Sometimes it could be an underlying values conversation or a softer skill that we can practice and learn. And although similarly in the community of practice sessions that I run, we don't come with solutions, there's often a lot of exploration as to possible opportunities and possible options that somebody can pursue when they come up with similar issues in the future. So we leave the dilemma with the individual, but they can get a lot of guidance and support. And sometimes the question even changes in the course of the conversation that takes place. So it's critical when we create these spaces to ensure that they are safe and supportive for people to be able to be vulnerable, to bring their dilemmas and to be quite open to exploring those dilemmas with fellow professionals. So I think the idea of learning in community, learning through these reflective practice sessions is really important in a whole range of different professions, actually, but particularly for lawyers who come out of a way of thinking that is often based on a sort of adversarial way of resolving problems. Mediation, of course, should be a kind of quasi-legal skill, and it should be taught in all the law schools. I don't think it is yet. But it's going to be very fundamental for lawyers to be able to understand the opportunities and also the differences that mediation can offer. In a way, sometimes freeing people from the constraints of a kind of formal legal framework, but freeing people to be able to think creatively about how problems can be resolved in a different kind of way from just putting them before a judge or an arbitrator or someone, and that people can develop agency through mediation to resolve problems in different kinds of ways and not always to look at things as having to be black or white. And I think that the young lawyers, because we're talking to young lawyers here, can usefully develop that perspective that the typical legal adversarial judicial way of looking at things is one way to address issues, but cheaper, more cost-effective, more empowering is to be able to think about the value of mediation as a way of addressing issues, solving problems, empowering people to take decisions that can work for them. And for mediators to be able to develop the skills and competencies to be able to, in that much more flexible kind of way, enable people to become empowered in that sense. But we have to really think very carefully about how we develop and train ourselves and skill ourselves up as mediators to be able to do this kind of work effectively. I'm quite sure that there's going to be more and more work for mediators in the years ahead. And in Gauteng, we now have provision for court-annexed mediation, in which the High Court is going to refer cases for mediation before they will put them on the roll, actually. And already some cases are starting to come through to mediators that have been referred away from the courts, not least because of huge backlogs in the court system. So judges are going to, and attorneys and so on, are going to be finding mediators and going to need to find mediators to be able to take on some of these cases. So I think it's very much going to be a growth area. It will spread throughout the country, I'm sure. And there's a lot of learning that will have to happen because the judges will have to learn about mediation, the attorneys will have to learn about mediation, and some of them will be resistant at first and skeptical. But more and more as it happens, there will be more and more referrals. And I think the judicial system will look with skepticism when the parties have not tried mediation first. And they will expect to see a mediation report that a case was unresolved before they will put it onto the roll. So I think it's a huge opportunity for mediators to step into how they skill themselves up, how they train themselves, and then develop themselves as professionals, which is what this is about. How are you going to ensure that in what can be a rather lonely space, as you mentioned, Tracy, sometimes you can be rather lonely as a mediator and you don't get feedback loops quickly. And so being able to step into these reflective spaces, I think, is really, really important. And Lisa, if you're going to establish some kind of reflective circles or whatever we want to call them, I think that would be an incredible contribution towards developing young lawyers to be the mediators of the future. We're really going to need a lot of you. So I think that's what I would say. Unless there are questions, Lisa, I think this is a great initiative and I think really important. So thanks to both of you.
Tracey, you want to add anything before I say anything?
Thanks, Mark. That was fascinating to listen to you. And you just said something that was just so critical, just about the groups that the young mediators go into needing to be safe spaces. And I think that, and Lisa, you also alluded to it, there's the humility of I'm coming and it's almost like, okay, here's my best attempt and I have this dilemma and I don't quite know what went wrong. I mean, that's you're exposing yourself and it's not what we really like to do. But I think the critical thing that I was just thinking as you're saying is that safe space is something that groups develop very quickly. You know, when we start sharing and it's vulnerable and we feel like I'm exposing myself, but we all doing it because we in the group scenario. We're not psychoanalyzing one another. We are not judging, but we're trying to assist someone. And just that I thought to myself, I was thinking on some of the reflective practice groups that we have run, and we've got 2 running currently in South Africa at the moment. And it was just like how quickly we build up that safe space. And the best way to do it is always just to say it's questions. Ask the question. Somebody makes a statement. Let's turn that into a question, which really is what we do as mediators. It's every statement should really be a question because that's what keeps us curious. But I just love that, you know, that holding a safe space for each other. And that's what makes reflective practice. That's what will make these community groups work. If people feel safe, they will come. And I can say I have seen they do feel safe because we take out judgments. I don't have anything more to add right now. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Tracy. I think just a closing note from my side. When I first got enamored with mediation, 5 years ago, what stood out to me was how welcoming this group is. They were like, I was nobody on LinkedIn. Yeah, do you want some training notes? Do you want this? Please call. Feel free to set up a call with me. I'm happy to answer your question. You would never get that, sadly, from legal professionals. And I can speak because I've been part of their community. You will never get that sharing. It's always, even with colleagues, it's, shield up. I'm not sharing. This is my strategy. It's my client privilege or whatever, And so you really have to drop your guard, and as Mark correctly alluded to, a value system. You've got to be that way as a person, right? To come, even to, maybe you might have to make some changes to make or to drop your guard a little bit. But once you understand the value that's going to bring you, we always talk about the 40-hour club mediator course. Colleague refers to it as 40-hour factory, where you go in and a regular person, you come out on the other end as a mediator. These reflective practice groups will obviously be cost effective. It'll be the best use of your time. You can do it from anywhere in the world. I mean, it's almost as easy as conducting a mediation session. So I think if you have the value system even to be a mediator, because no one can teach. I mean, yeah, you can teach somebody empathy, you can teach them humility, but things can happen to them that humble them or bring them a little of that. I feel there's a certain bunch of stuff that we are born with, and we just, cut off for certain things. So the value system as a mediator is ultimately what's going to drive you to want to develop yourself. Not for results, not for turnover, but to develop yourself as a problem solver, because problem solving occurs in every context, not just in a so-called professional mediation. So if you develop yourself in that way, it's going to benefit your problem solving, your troubleshooting capabilities across the board, if you are part of the circle like that. And like I said, it's just commitment to learning. And as Mark pointed out, as adults, especially, we learn better in the social setting, as opposed to be sitting behind a computer and doing a reflective practice module. I mean, that just defeats the whole purpose of a group. Right? So I think if you are one of those that are studying LLB or you're in the profession already, got a track record, got some experience. And maybe you just, I mean, you just tired, like you don't want to have your shields up all the time. You're very, now I wouldn't say pacifist, but it's really the stuff behind the conflict that actually drives you, all of those things. Then this is the best form of CPD you can have. There's no cost to it, you just need a phone, internet, maybe Zoom, whatever. And you are actively, as Mark said, you are sort of flashing out the soft skill. Because you might not have certain skills. And what you formulate your question at the start of the group. And then you sort of have this epiphany and you say, okay, if I knew how to do X, or if I had this particular soft skill, or if I was a clearer communicator, I thought I was a clear communicator up until we met, okay? And then of course the group is there to help you develop. You don't have to go and sign up for a course on communication or buy a best-selling book. So it really, and as professionals, or you're going to be in the so-called professional space, you can't stagnate. So if you're going to mediate actively, if you're going to be taking on other people's problems, you've got to be sharp. Okay, so you can't, as we said, we alluded to, I think before we hit the call, we said we can't teach mediation. We can teach a bare bones process. But as I tell students, every single mediation, whether you've done it 40 times, 100 times, if you've done 100 family mediations, the 101st one is going to be different. And you cannot come into that mediation with the template of the past 100. Okay. And so these groups, these reflective practice groups, once you find that space or find this to belong to, it's going to keep you sharp. And I think the best form of growth is not just professionally, but personally. So this group is also benefiting you as a person, which ultimately is what needs to factor into your mediation. So if you need to communicate better, you have a group that's helping you to communicate better, and that actually, has a ripple effect into other areas of your life, not just your job. So I know we've just scratched the surface, and hopefully we can do more sessions like this. It's just, I think, as we mentioned about the Gauteng division now making court annex mediation a thing, and that we anticipate it spreading, this has to become popular. So we're not going to be offering courses, we're not going to be teaching people, because none of us are experts. I only get called an expert sometimes. I think it's just out of respect, maybe. But there's nothing that we can teach you. And I'm the novice in the room. There's nothing that we can teach you from any level of experience that's going to say, right, these are the silver bullets to be a top-notch mediator. No, it's something you have to be, like with other professions, you have to be personally responsible to keep yourself on the cutting edge so that you can solve people's problems in the most effective way and be growing as a person. So I think it's always a win-win in that regard. You don't isolate one from the other. And yeah, just humility is a huge thing, which lawyers, not a strong point for them, because they're always expected to have all the answers, as I said. So, we kind of feel sheepish if they say, I don't know. You'd rather ask a colleague, quietly on the other end, or if you don't know how to draft something, we'll ask a colleague, do you have a template? Instead of saying the client, I've never done a draft like this before. But, if you come even into a legal professional practice, I mean, that in itself in the profession is revolutionary because lawyers don't ask for help. And like I said, we often have our shields up. So we're more likely in the legal professional practice reflective practice group to be the ones giving the answers. So saying, hey, you should have done this, you should have done that. And it'll be just comedy of errors defeating the purpose of the truth. But I'm sure that there are plenty of humble practitioners out there. It's just that the vulnerability and the humility that's required, I think, is something that's, in my experience anyway, with this group is peculiar to mediators because we are so people focused and we're so aware of the effects of conflict, and we are driven by things that may not even be monetary. It may have a higher social good, just to have more peace, and to see people, as Mark mentioned, agency, to be empowered to to facilitate their own resolution. So we are not even solvers, we are, facilitators. We just sort of standing by the referee just to keep everyone in line. But the solution is theirs to implement. That's what we want, and that in itself is a reward. If you don't have comebacks, that in itself is a reward. So hopefully, not my rambling, but our panelists, I won't call them guests because they probably different, they're not superstars, but I hold them in high esteem. So, and you'll probably be seeing more of them as we have more panels like this, trying again to educate. And if you want to reach out to any one of our guests, as I told them, I'm not event-based, so it's what happens after the discussion, the talk, that actually, is the substance or is the will. So if you want to reach out to Tracey-Leigh or to Mark, I think LinkedIn might be the best way. You search for them, Tracey-Leigh Wessels and Mark Turpin, Turpin. And yeah, maybe you want to join one of Mark's groups, or you want to join, or you want to get in touch with Tracy and figure out how that works. So, right, they're yours. We are your resources, and I'm hoping to create more panels like this as further resources and bring on more people that you can start networking with, who will be able to take you forward in your mediation enthusiasm. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tracy. It was a long time coming, but we did it. And yeah, it will be up on my YouTube channel, Your Friendly Law Mom, LEWMON. Probably by next week, and you'll be able to watch it on demand. So thank you, colleagues, and
Thank you.
have a good evening.
You too. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.